right, so let's refactor a registration, which we already implemented, right? Let's refactor to now use Passport.js. So one of the first steps that we'll need is that we need to whenever now that we're going to be generating any request back to the server, we want to make sure that we notify the server that all these communications are now secure, right? That the cookies are going to be encrypted. They should use that the server should use the authentication provider that is configured, right? And to do that, we're going to be using a new service that is part of the HTTP module, right? That implements the request options. So that we're going to turn on security. We're going to turn on security. So let's do that. Let's go to our service, user service, user, and our register. Actually, we had a create user, right? And create user is a little bit too vague, right? Create user is a little bit too vague in that it's not only used by us, right? By someone who's registering, but it's a little bit too generic. Okay, it could be also interpreted as being used by a system administrator or somebody who creates a new user. Right? They're not necessarily registering, right? They're just a system administrator might create just a random user, correct? So this create user, it's a little bit too generic. Okay? Instead, let's create one that is specific for registering, which has it's a different use case, right? Not only are we registering, but now once we register, presumably, we are now logged in as that one user. As opposed to, if I'm a system administrator, I can create a user, but I'm still logged in as an administrator. I'm not logged in as that user I just created. Make sense? So it's two distinct use cases. Right? So let's create a specific use case for registering. Okay? Right? So let's create here two new functions, right? Register and login specifically. Oh, do we have login? Yeah, we don't have login. We have maybe find user by credential. That's still also a little bit vague. All right, let's implement them a little more specific. And in here we're going to be using the request options. So let's import them here. Request options. There it is. We're going to create a brand new instance of it in the user service. Okay. And once we've done that, we're going to use it. We're going to use it in our register function. We're going to use it to turn on credentials, okay, with credentials equal true, right? Meaning this communication is going to be secure, right? All right. So let's implement register. Register would be with a username and password. Right? And it's very similar to what we already had, right? So we're gonna use a brand new URL, okay, API/register, as opposed to this create user that goes to API user, right? That is a kind of like a generic create. It could be us creating ourselves, or it could be an administrator creating a brand new user. So this URL is a little bit too generic. Let's be something a little more specific on what the intent here is. Right? Not only am I creating a user, but now I would like to be logged in as that user. Okay. We'll create credentials as an object that we're going to send in as a post, right? That keeps track of the username and password. We're going to turn on the credentials so that we make sure that the communications will be secure. And then we're gonna post to this URL. We're gonna post to the URL. We're gonna post to the register URL. We're gonna pass in the credentials and pass in these options. And these are the options that are going to ensure, right, that we are communicating with Passport. Passport is going to receive this information. It's going to unencrypt the cookie. It's going to deserialize it and convert it back into a JSON object so that it can get a hold of the user ID, right? And then it can look us up in the database to see if we're still valid. Okay. All right. There we go. All right. So we're done there. Now this brand new register. Okay, so the user service is already registered as a provider. We don't have to do that. In the register component, let's rewrite it so that as part of the register application, right? We're going to be using our brand new register function. Yes, our brand new register function. Let's take a look at the register component. Register component, there it is. Right now, what we have is this, right? We have lookup by username, and if we don't have a user, then create the user. Yes. Okay. So let's refactor this a little bit. Let's refactor. So let's leave this as is. Let's leave this check to see the username. Let's leave that. Actually, no. Let me rewrite this a little bit. Let me rewrite that. Let's comment that out. And let's use our brand new this.register. Oops, this user service register, and we're going to pass in this.username and this.last name, password. There we go. All right. We're going to subscribe, and we're going to presumably get back a user, almost what we had originally. Okay, once we have the user, what we're going to do is once we have the user, we're going to store it in our shared service, right? So that other components, right, as I navigate to the other components, they can get a hold of this this user that has just logged in. Right? But we don't have this service. We'll need to provide it, inject it as a variable here, shared service. There it is. There we go. Shared service. We're going to store it there so that other components, as I navigate to the profile page or I navigate all throughout the application, I am maintaining that information as opposed to as encoding it in the URL. And once we've done that, we can then navigate to the profile. We can then just go to the profile. Notice that we used to navigate to the profile followed by the user ID. See that? Right? Our profile assumes that you're going to provide the user ID of the user that's currently logged in, right? Because we are maintaining state at the client. And the client then would send this information back to the server so that the server could reconstruct the state. Yes? In here, we're not going to navigate to the profile. We don't want to encode the URL. We're not going to maintain that particular state on the client. Instead, the server is going to remember the currently logged in user. And they're going to know who the user ID is. And no longer are we going to encode that on the client. For this to work, we're going to have to change our profile routing a little bit, right? In our routing for the profile, we have right here, profile user ID. See that? That navigates to the profile component. I'm going to change this a little bit so that if I don't provide the user ID, I still navigate to the profile component, right? If I have a user ID, it'll still work the old way, right? But if I don't have a profile, I'll navigate to the profile component. Currently, the profile component is not smart enough to know that the server is the one who knows who's logged in, right? It's still written in such a way that it assumes that you're passing in the user ID. Right? So we're going to have to refactor our profile to make it a little smarter. Right? That says, hey, we're not giving you the profile ID. Right? The server knows about this. Right? You don't. Okay. All right. So let's keep going. In the template, in the register template, I believe we already have that. Let's verify this. Let's go to the template for the register component, and we have, let's see, we have a username, we have a password, we have a validate password, which I don't believe we're using, and the click on register. So it's pretty much what we have here. And this is being done in the unregister which then calls our brand new register user service. Make sense? All right. So that's the client side. Right. On the server side, we need to change things a little bit. All right. We should have already a user schema and probably also a user model. Right. Probably already have that. Hopefully. Let's see on the server. On the server, we already have a user schema, right? That includes a username and password and whatnot. Yes. Here in the example is just giving you the simplest of implementations, right? At least you need the username and password. We're going to export it. We did that already, and presumably we have a model. So here we also show you a model or the beginnings of what a model would be. Okay, where you would have implemented the create user, the find user by ID, right, and many other implementations here, right, in the model. And we already have that, I believe. Let's see, we certainly have create user. We already have find user by ID, find user by ID. We have that already, right? So all that is implemented, so we don't have to do that. Once we have that, right, we need to refactor the user service. Currently, the user service is not written to remember anything, right? It's not maintaining any session information or use passport or anything like that. Okay, so we need to refactor it to use our brand new passport implementation. Okay, all right. So let's go to the user service on the server. So we have the user service here, and we already have a couple of things here. Let's see. We have to be able to create a user, find a user, update a user, and whatnot. Okay. So let's add a couple more things in here. We have a user model already. Okay, we have that. Let's now bring passport here. All right, let's bring passport. Bring passport, and we're going to set up functions. We're going to tell passport how to interpret the cookie, right? As it goes back and forth, right? We're going to tell passport what do we want to store in the cookie, right? Typically, we only need the ID of the user. That's the only thing that really identifies the currently logged in user, right? Instead, we're gonna store a couple more things in there, right? We're going to store the entire user object in there. Right? It doesn't really matter because it's all going to be encrypted, right? It's going to be stored on the client as an encrypted string, right? So that only the server will only ever know what's in that cookie. Okay. But we need to tell it what is it that we want to put in there, right? And how to reconstitute whatever comes from the cookie, right? So to do that, Passport provides two functions. One, the serialized user, and the other one is deserialized user, right? To store user information as it travels back and forth between the client and the server. Right, so let's do that. Let's configure the serializer and deserializer, and let's implement the deserializer. First the serializer. The serializer is where we tell a Passport what do we want to store in that cookie. What is it that we want to store in there, right? For us, it's going to be the user object, right? The entire user object is going to be stored in there. Okay. So I'm just gonna paste it way down here at the very end of my function, and then we also going to tell it how to deserialize, how to retrieve how to reconstitute the user object from whatever comes in the cookie. Okay. Oops. Let's copy this. Right. To do that, we're going to it's going to deserialize whatever came back from the client. Presumably, we had added in there a user object. Presumably, yes. And as part of the user object, it should have the username. It should have the ID of the user. Right, once it has been unencrypted, and we can use that new JSON object that comes back from the client to make sure that user still exists, right, that it is indeed in the database, and what Passport does is that it provides to us a callback function, right, a callback function that we can notify Passport whether indeed this is a good thing, this is a good user, this user exists, and this should be the currently logged in user, or no, this user doesn't exist, something went wrong. So, tag this person as person non grata, that this is not the currently logged in user, right? This is not a valid user. And the way the communication works is that it provides a function. This done function is a function that we use to notify Passport in the different life cycles, right? The life cycle of us authenticating the user or not authenticating the user. Okay? And the way it works is that if we say okay, if we want to say yes, the current user is valid, we call the function with null for an error, and then the object that we want to use as to represent the currently logged in user. Okay, in this case, it's the user that was stored in the database. Right, we're retrieving it from the database. Once we have the user from the database, we're going to use that object as the currently logged in user. Right, and what Passport is going to do is that it's going to store that information in the session, in RAM, in the server RAM. Okay, tied or indexed by the cookie that came in from the browser. If it's a different browser, somebody else's browser, right, that's trying to log in, it'll be a completely separate piece of RAM that is mapped to the cookie for that browser. If it's 100 browsers that are communicating with us, there will be 100 sessions, right, one per user that we are authenticating. Okay, and so now we're asking for more RAM from the server, right? Now it's becoming a little. If we would track the footprint of Node.js, we would see that it would be incrementing its footprint and asking for more and more memory, right? As more and more folks try to store information here for those particular users. Okay. All right. So we have the serialize and deserialize. Once we've done that, right? We need to now listen for the incoming register, right? The register is going to come in as a post, right? Remember, we just wrote it on the client server, right? We need to listen for that incoming post, right? So let's write that at the top here, right? We're going to declare this post that is going to come in from the client, right? Remember the service, right, is generating this post right here. Right? The client, the client service is generating a post, and we need to listen for that incoming post on the server. All right. So on the server, we're going to have a function that is going to implement that register, or the request and response. And what register is going to do is going to it's going to do what we used to do with create a new user, right? It's going to just create the user. It's going to parse the user from the body, and it's going to create it. It's going to create the user. But it's going to do something else. It's going to do one more thing. Oops. Right? It's going to create it as a brand new user in the database, obviously. Right? Perhaps we should do some validation to see if that that username is already taken, whatnot. But I'm skipping that part. But it's going to do one more thing. Okay? It's going to log in that user. It's going to tell Passport, hey, this brand new user I just created, that is the currently logged in user. Okay? This user is currently logged in. So add it to the session, and remember that this user is logged in. And the cookie that I'm going to send back, okay, is going to be used to remember that this person is currently logged in. So that next time you don't block their navigation. You don't that they've authenticated themselves, and at least for the next 30 minutes, as long as the session is still valid, Okay, this user is known to be a currently logged in user. Make sense? Notice that the function login, that's a brand new function. Passport added that function, right? And it added it to the request object that we have been using all along. It's the same request object that we've been using all along, retrieving parameters, retrieving cookies, right? This is the same request object that we've been using. Passport, adds utility functions, right, to the request object so that we can interact with Passport. To ask it to please log in a user, we could also ask, is there a currently logged in user, right? Or who is currently logged in? All is stored in the request object, right? As part of the function that is, as a part of the argument that is passed in to all our function handlers, right? All our HTTP handlers. Okay. All right. So this user, we're going to log in that user, and then we are going to respond back to the client saying that this is the currently logged in user. All right. Right. Okay, so that is going to allow us to log in, create the user, and Passport is now going to remember that that person is currently logged in. Right? Right. The next thing we need to do is do the other half. Right. Once we have logged in, we would like to be able to perhaps, once we have registered, we would like to be able to log in as that user that we just registered as. Right. So let's play around with that next.